Welcome to this episode of the Ugly EVO Build blog. In this video, we are going to take a look at installing an aftermarket oil cooler. We're going to crush our blow-off valve so it can hold a bit more pressure. We're going to install an STM02 Eliminator Downpipe. And we're also going to swap out the rear shocks and a rear lower control arm bushing. Oh, and yeah, we finally make our way to the dirt track for a little racing. So we're going to start with some quick hits, some minor things that we did to the rusty EVO build here. The first thing, we just had our strut tower bar powder coated, and so we reinstalled our strut tower bar. I waited to do that before we had the injectors installed because I knew I'd remove it anyway to get to the fuel injectors once we had installed those 1200cc high Z injectors. Next, because it seemed like a good idea, I crushed the blow-off valve so it would hold a bit more pressure. Crushing the blow-off valve is basically just kind of where you put it in a vise, and as you can see, the one on the left here is shrunk down a little bit more. It's pushed down a bit. That tightens up that spring, and that makes sure your blow-off valve doesn't start leaking at certain higher pressure, since we're running about 27 psi on this EVO 9 turbo. And then I had to steal the battery tie down from my red EVO. That's why you can see the red tie down here, until a different one showed up. I found a used tie down kit on eBay, so I bought that for like 25 bucks. But then I was surprised to learn you could buy brand new from STM. STM did have a brand new tie down stuff that you could buy for honestly like the same price or cheaper. So I do have a brand new one in stock now, kind of ready to go, but I picked up this used one as well, and it's actually just fine for this ugly EVO build here. But we need that battery tie down to do racing. I definitely wanted that battery securely tied down for any type of racing I was going to do. Another quick item, I finally got to reinstalling the rear seats. They were out of the car for quite some time, so I just did some quick vacuuming, and then I had a little help from my daughter. She was helping me out put the seats back in place. I have a full how-to video on swapping EVO interior when I actually took it out of this car and put the original interior from this car into my black EVO. So if you want to check that out, that's on my channel as well for swapping in the interior. But as I mentioned, I just put back in the rear seats because they had been out for quite some time. Honestly, just because I had so many parts just rolling around here in the car and needed room basically for that gas tank. So once all that gas tank situation was figured out, got to put the back seats in, had my daughter helping me out. She wanted to get things back in so she could go for a ride. So yeah, she helped put the back seat back in, and then we installed her Recaro racing seat as well. So we got that back in, and she got to go for a little ride. She does like this EVO better than the black EVO because it's quieter. Next, I went back to my dad's shop so I could swap out a lower control arm bushing and the rear shocks. Now you might ask, well, how did I know it needed a lower control arm bushing? Or a general tip here, actually, for anyone trying to diagnose a bad suspension component, if you got a weird noise when you hit bumps or something like that, basically if you get your car off the ground and then you kind of shake the wheel up and down or side to side, shake might not be the right word, but you want to hold your hands on each side of the wheel and just try to move it, in and out, forward and back, up and down. And when you're doing that, what you're going to do is you want to look for what might be moving. You want to look for the piece that could be, that's basically has too much slop or too much play in it. And in this case, you can definitely see that it's this rear lower control arm bushing, the innermost part where it connects. You can see it moves way more than it should, and you can hear it as well. So since these shocks that were in this car were so rusty and I did not trust them, I was going to swap them out with other OEM shocks. And while I was in there, it seemed like a perfect time to, of course, swap out that bushing as well. We get out the old trusty bolt buster. We're going to heat up all these nuts and bolts to remove the nuts and bolts that we need to get out of the way here. A tip for this, if you're doing it, is you kind of just want to do one side at a time. I didn't follow my own rules here. I dropped both of these at the same time. You end up fighting yourself a little bit if you are just trying to change your rear shocks if you drop both of them at the same time. So I would suggest doing one at a time if you happen to be swapping out the shocks in your EVO. Just drop one side at a time. Otherwise, you may have to disconnect your rear sway bar, because basically connecting those two together and then dropping both shocks at the same time kind of puts extra pressure on there, and it makes it harder to get your shocks back in place, as we'll actually see a little bit later. So luckily, again, as rusty as this car was, not a lot of issues actually getting these bolts out, and it was great that things went pretty smooth with this job. It's nice to see that gas tank in place. That looks nice, fresh JDM tank up there. But of course, the car is a little bit rusty and hasn't been serviced probably for a while, so things were a little bit sticky and a little bit tough to get out of place. So the side with the bushing that needed to be replaced was the passenger side of the vehicle. Everything else seemed good enough for this car, but now I am on the driver's side of the vehicle because I'm swapping out both rear shocks. So again, I dropped both arms at the same time here. And now we're back to the passenger side. It would have been easier to remove the muffler probably to get in here, but I was able to sneak in with a punch to knock this bolt out. It was rather seized in there a bit, so I definitely needed a punch to get it out. But it came out okay, and hopefully that's good news for you guys, because, you know, if mine came out fine, hopefully it should be the same on your car, because yours can't be rustier than mine. Then I had to utilize a hammer a little bit to knock this free and get it out of place. I didn't film the actual install of this bushing because it requires a lot of hands, and it's just a little bit tricky kind of to do, but you do need a press to press in this bushing. But if you did want to just reference this number, I do have the new bushing here on screen and the part number that you can see. So if you were looking to change this bushing on your EVO, there you go, you got that information. Again, to change it though, you will need access to a press. I just have a photo here of when I pressed out the old one before I put the new one in. It went fairly smooth, but I do have a little bit of experience doing these, you know, jobs before, so I think that helped. But again, not a full how-to on that, and just kind of giving you details, a little bit more detail about what you would need to expect if you were going to jump into that. So once we swapped that bushing out, I was able to dive back into these old shocks, and as you can see, they are really, really rusty. So we pulled out our old rusty shocks and put in some used OEM shocks, put those in place. They're going to work great for what I want. I don't really want coilovers for this or anything, because I want something that's going to give me some good travel, and I want something that's a comfortable ride. And actually, these have been great. It's definitely one of those things where it kind of spoils me when I go from one EVO to the other. This EVO just rides very nice. Stock suspension is tough to beat for just driving, daily driving, actually. But of course, I love the look of my black EVO better when it's lowered. So again, after we changed that bushing in that lower control arm, we just put that lower control arm in place. And this is where it again got a little bit tricky. Because I had both lower control arms loosened, it was harder to get it up in place than it should have been, I guess, basically. The trick to it for me basically ended up being to put a socket and a ratchet on the sway bar link itself, and then utilize that to get a little more pressure and lift to get it to lift it up in place. But of course, it was great to have a hoist for this. You could go up and down, lower it up a bit, and, you know, just makes everything easier to work on. So I was glad I could do that. I also didn't entirely film this stuff as much as a how-to because I was on a time crunch again, because I honestly did this like a month ago from the time I'm filming this voiceover, because I wanted to switch these shocks out before the first time I did it, Spectator Racing, because I wasn't feeling very good about the ones that were on there to take it out on a dirt track. So you can just kind of see where I did have that ratchet on the sway bar link and got to utilize that to kind of get those bolts lined up and get everything in place. Next, we're going to jump into what I'm going to call tips for installing an aftermarket oil cooler. This is a B&M oil cooler. It's basically the STM kit that you would buy. It's like 300 some bucks. And if you've watched any of my other videos, my how-to videos, especially the one about changing the OEM oil cooler lines, I had made a comment in there that if I had to do it all over again, I would probably just buy an aftermarket cooler because it was basically the same price. But now I kind of see why it was nice to do it the way I did it and just buy the OEM lines, because when you buy this kit, you are literally like creating the lines and you're making this whole thing yourself. And there are no real directions online for how to install this aftermarket oil cooler, which I found interesting. And I guess the reason for it, I think, is because people don't really want to tell you specifically what you should do, because maybe they don't know for sure, or they don't want to be liable for telling you what to do. I'm not really sure. But good news for you guys is I have some tips for you with things that I did with my oil cooler install. Of course, first thing you want to do is remove your front bumper so you could get to this where this oil cooler goes. And then the STM kit, I bought the bracket that comes with the STM kit, and I didn't like it. It just like bolts in one spot. It makes it so that the hoses would kind of point down, as you can see here. And it just seemed, I didn't like only having one mounting point is basically what it came down to. But here's how you can, this is a mock-up. I did quite a few mock-ups in this process. So here's how you can see what it would look like if you utilize that bracket. I'm sure people have used it and it's worked fine. But again, I plan on being on a dirt track doing ice racing and stuff. So I really wanted to make sure this was secure in place. So I felt like this bracket with one mounting point wasn't going to really cut it for me. Maybe I missed something. If someone else is running this bracket and another one that works well, let me know what worked for you. But here's a mock-up of what I did with the OEM oil cooler brackets. I basically ended up modifying them to fit. This was just another test fit. As you can see right now, I have the lines kind of running towards the outside of the car. I did not end up running this specific way, but I was trying to figure out how I could utilize these OEM brackets to the best I could and without modifying them a whole lot. So this was just kind of a test fit with that. And now we flip to the test fit that I ended up actually going with. This is before I cut the brackets. I'm going to have to, or at least the top bracket you're seeing, I end up grinding and cutting. So that's another thing you would have to do if you want to do this my way. So I understand why it would be simpler for people that don't have the right tools to just buy that bracket from STM and utilize that. But here you can see the basic mock-up I did to kind of figure out what I needed to do to my brackets. So this main bracket here that hangs down is the one I'm going to have to cut. Here you can see how close it is. It's very close to the frame rail there. I did end up tweaking it to give myself more room, as you're going to see later on as well. So this is one of the main brackets I had to modify quite a bit. So I ended up taking a cutoff wheel and grinding out where I thought I had to remove pieces to make this work. The nice part about using these OEM brackets is that all you end up doing then, if you do it this way, is just kind of removing certain pieces of it. You don't really have to add new places, new mounting points. So that's kind of a nice feature. And of course, the main advantage to me was really just utilizing two different mounting points and not just having one spot where it connects to the car. So I don't really know if anyone would ever completely copy what I did here, but just letting you know and showing you kind of the portion I cut out, what it looks like. I ended up bending the other bracket. I didn't have to cut this bracket that has the two mounting bolts where it bolts to the frame rail. I didn't have to cut that one. I just had to kind of bend it around a bit to make it sit where I wanted. And as you can see here, I had to notch out this one little piece as well on this bracket just to get it to fit really the way I wanted. So this is pretty close to the final piece of what this bracket looked like before, of course, I had to prime it and paint it because this car is pretty nice. I don't think I should have anything rusty on this car, so I had to paint it. But if you plan on doing something like this and need more details on it, reach out to me on Instagram or something. Let me know if you have questions about it, about actually making the brackets. I can give you more details. But I ended up, as you can see, working in the dark now, doing another test fit after I let these dry. I wanted to do my final test fit after I painted them and make sure that these would mount up like I wanted them to. And yeah, everything worked out pretty well to utilize the OEM brackets. I had to build basically an extender piece. You need a little piece of metal to add to that other bracket that mounts to the car itself with the two bolts, the one I'm talking about bending. I had to basically to get clearance. So I had enough clearance for that top line so it wasn't right up against the frame rail. You basically had to push things out. You can see it a little bit here, and unfortunately I didn't film it very well, again because this was a learning process for me. I've mentioned this before, I don't like making how-to videos on something I haven't done more than once, and this is obviously my first time. But here you can see that bracket. There's a little piece where it connects the two brackets together, basically the oil cooler and that one bracket. But I was definitely pretty happy with how it finally turned out, but it took me a couple of days honestly to get it the way I wanted it. Next, something they don't give you instructions for again when you get this is like how to put the lines together, really. But basically this one piece of the line here, I'm not even sure the proper terminology for this, but I ended up, putting this on. And it's tricky to get on because of the mesh. There's like a wire mesh around this hose to protect it, of course, but it's tricky to get these ends on. You kind of have to finagle it around and twist it on, push it on very hard. But I just showed you that shot of the hose because I believe you'd want that hose pushed up as far as you can to that connecting piece before you screw it in place, as I'm doing now, and then the two pieces kind of just screw together. And I will say too that if you're buying this like full STM kit, I think they should change a piece on it as well. So I'm going to give you that warning right now that one of the 90s, which I think they might have even changed that kit since I bought it, because when I bought it, they sent me like 245 or 60 degree elbows. And then I looked on the way the kit was, and then all of a sudden it said they had 90 degree elbows. And basically, yeah, you want a 90 or even a 120 for one of these lines. But here's both lines I ended up making. Again, I did this like a month ago, so I don't honestly remember. But I think I ended up modifying one of these and shortening a little bit. But roughly speaking, you can see this this one line here was about 20 inches or so. And again, I think I shortened up one of them. That's why this is not an exact how-to. You do need to cut this stuff, and it's tough to cut. If you buy the STM oil cooler kit, they're just going to give you a full like 5-foot thing, and then you cut it to the length you need. And I think one of the trickiest parts for this was, for me at least, I mean, these are pipe thread, apparently, the ends that go into the B&M cooler. So I did some research. I tried to figure out what I should use to prevent these from leaking, because of course it's an oil cooler. You do not want it to leak oil. And pipe tape is kind of what was recommended, but apparently pipe tape along with pipe dope is maybe what would have worked here. That is kind of what the go-to seems to be, like in the actual plumbing industry, pipe tape and pipe dope. So that might work for this. But I'm just going to say, I'm just going to give you my experience and what I learned from this. I tried this with pipe tape. I tried it without pipe tape, and it leaked like bad. Like it was leaking all the time. You need to be careful when you tighten these up. You can over-tighten them. You can break things. So if you try to install this aftermarket oil cooler and it's leaking, don't just try to tighten it, because it doesn't work. Pipe thread works differently than like what you're probably used to with working on a car with a normal nut and bolt. So that forewarning up front, don't over tighten this if you are trying to install an aftermarket oil cooler with the pipe thread. So again, I basically did a bunch of test fits for this. Another tip I kind of have for you with this is, if you planned on like saying, oh, well, I'm going to change my oil anyway, I'll just drain my oil, run the new oil cooler, and then I'll add my fresh oil and test everything. That's what I was going to do at first, and then I thought about it and I was like, you know what, that probably doesn't make the most sense, especially if I'm going to be leaking oil, because then I'm going to have to try to fix my leaks and stuff like that anyway, and then I'm just losing the new oil I added. And it was easier than I thought to actually just swap out these new lines, at least for me, because I had the oil cooler block off stuff, so just some plugs that went to the oil filter housing. I was able to pull those plugs and then fairly quickly add the new lines to that. So that was kind of nice that I could do that. So basically, I tested this a couple times with the old oil that was in it and ran it, which was actually kind of nice too, because then if you think about it, if there was anything in that oil cooler, any debris in there, obviously they're super hard to clean, and that's the reason you'd buy a new one anyways. You expect it to be clean. But if there was anything in there, at least then I ran it for a heat cycle, or at least a little while before, just a little bit, just to run oil through that new oil cooler, and then I dumped it right away. Once everything was situated here where there weren't leaks, then I finally changed my oil. So as you can see, this was with the pipe tape. The pipe tape honestly just kind of like got eaten up, it seemed like, and it leaked, and it leaked pretty good. So after a bit more research, this is what I found that is working for me right now. I am hesitant to, of course, say this is what you should for sure use. I would love to hear someone else's opinion on this and find out what you used if you did install your oil cooler. But this Permatex aviation Formagasket stuff, you can get it at your local parts store. I have way more of it than I need at this point. But this sealant liquid this whole bottle was relatively cheap, I think under 10 bucks. And it, for me, seemed to work like a charm. I just put a little bit on the threads before I tightened up, and that's all I used. And that took care of my leaks, at least as of now, so far. Again, I've been running it for about a month or so. It did seem like it, I wouldn't say leaked, but I don't know if it was just the stuff wearing in a little bit. Like it was a bit sticky and almost like this stuff was kind of getting through, but it was way better than it was. Like I could handle, you know, if it did leak just a drop now and then, could handle that compared to initially when I did it, it was like drop, drip, 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 like a constant drip. So again, I wish they gave you more direction on this. When you buy a kit like this, it would be nice if they did something to tell you more of these details. But hopefully this will help you guys out so you don't run into the same problems I did. And hopefully someone else too that has done this, you know, leave a comment section, let me know what you think. So once I tested that out and it wasn't leaking, I was like, great, I'll test a bit more. And I tested the clearance, and that's where I ran into issues. You can see that the tire here, basically at full turn to the left, it would rub against the actual line I had installed. Now I knew once I zip tied it and stuff, it would pull it over, but I did not like the way this looked. Again, I think this was about a 60-degree elbow, and I was like not having it. I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. I need to change this. So luckily there was a store close to me that carried these in stock. Thank you, Beyond Redline. And I ended up picking up a 90 that I think would have originally come with this kit if you got it from STM. And then I also picked up a 120-degree, I believe it was, elbow, because they had it in stock. And I also want to say I think I cut a little bit off the line because I felt like there's a little bit extra slack in the hose. So I cut the hose a little bit shorter. Again, I don't fully remember. At least now I was to the point where I felt comfortable that everything wasn't going to leak. So I drained my oil, did my normal oil change, and, you know, removed the filter so you can get a better view here. I'll also say that these fittings that went into this oil filter housing, for those, I actually just used a little bit of blue Permatex. These are different, you know, types of fittings than the pipe fittings that go to your oil cooler. So far so good for me. You don't want to overuse the Permatex, but I haven't experienced any, you know, leaks with this. But I used the blue Permatex on the sides that went to the oil cooler housing, or the oil filter housing, rather, I should say. Again, I'm very curious if anyone's done this themselves, what they had used to prevent any leaks if they installed their own aftermarket oil cooler. And now I'm just showing the sped up process of me swapping these out, the different options we had. I was able to just pull out that old 60-degree one, loosen that up. You basically need some bigger wrenches for this job as well to get these fittings created or put in place. So yeah, there might be a reason that they don't give you directions on this when you buy the kit, but hopefully this is helpful for you guys. But of course, do anything you see in this video at your own risk. Be careful when you're messing with the oil from your engine. You know, you can screw things up if you have a major leak or if you add any contaminant to your oil. So we had to do another test. We put the wheel back on after we swapped out that one angle, and as you can see here, successful. This is pretty much the final version of what it looked like. Lots of room now in there, a few inches actually. As you can see, the wheel is fully turned and there's lots of room in there. So that worked out excellent. And then actually a few days later again, because working when I can, I installed the fender liner as well. And everything fit pretty well. I was happy overall with this and how it all fit. And here's just a final walkthrough showing what everything looked like, the way I ran my lines, the way that I mounted this with the brackets. Of course, I utilized some zip ties here to try to keep everything, you know, where I thought it should go the best, where it's away from the wheel and also being away, you know, from the engine, you know, the pulleys and everything like that. So as you can see, that one line, the longer line, does kind of run up and forward, and that's actually... it runs up towards the front of the car and over the lower intercooler pipe, kind of on purpose, because if the 90-degree elbow coming off of that oil cooler went straight back, it kind of pointed right towards the wheel again. So I didn't see any harm in particularly running the line a little bit longer, running it forward like I did there. And what was really nice, again, with adding this tilt to it, basically, is that I could get to this top mount, or I should say this top line on the oil cooler. I could easily actually get that on and off, which came in very handy since I had to mount this a couple times and redo those lines a couple times. But of course, to finish this job, you're going to have to put your bumper back on. So I did that. And after it was on, just showing you that, this isn't the stock location, so it should still get some decent airflow. I was a bit surprised when I touched this how warm it got, but I haven't really compared it to see how much, if it felt much warmer than the OEM one like I have on my black car. I'm not really sure if this one performs any better than OEM, but it's definitely good to have this option if you had, an engine that was blown up or something, and you didn't. Obviously, you shouldn't risk reusing your OEM one if, or whatever one you had on when the engine blew up. You should end up swapping it out. So it's good to have this a little bit cheaper option if needed. And yeah, then we got the fender liner installed. It all fit up pretty well. It all clearance fine. It wasn't the best condition fender liner, but it was good to have something in there to give it a little bit of protection again, because we're going out on dirt track. And if you watched my most recent video blog series all the way to the end, you saw that we did get this silver EVO up on the dyno, and we kind of determined that one of our main restrictions in horsepower was actually the stock O2 housing. So we weren't able to kind of get our boost to hold as much as we wanted at the top end. So I invested in this STM O2 Eliminator Downpipe. Another time crunch here, so I only filmed little bits and pieces of it, but you can see the stock O2 housing here. I ended up pulling that out along with the busher downpipe I had. Dropped that as well. And then we put in this STM O2 Eliminator pipe. It went fairly well. There is one nut basically that I have no idea how you're supposed to get it on there unless you modify one of the studs that comes out of the turbo that it bolts to. So honestly, there's 4 out of 5 holding this thing in right now, so it seems to work fine that way, but it does seem like either a poor design or something again where maybe STM should send you a different stud that you would put in to actually be able to get to that nut. So again, curious if you ever had a similar issue installing an O2 Eliminator downpipe. Did you have any issues with actually getting that that nut on? If you're familiar, if you remember, there's actually like 3 bolts, I believe, and then 2 studs with nuts that go to them. And then one of those nuts that goes to the studs, for me at least, could not really get it in there without modifying stuff. So 4 to 5 seemed right. So that is a lot, but yeah, it feels good. I wanted to get caught up. It's been very busy around here lately, so I wanted to update you guys with everything that happened on the EVO. I did most of this before I did Spectator Racing once with the car. I did it one night where there was only a couple matches, and it was good to get the car out on the track, get a feel for how it handled. So I did that, and then there was kind of the main event, the end of the year Spectator Racing at the fair that we got to do in the daylight. So that's always fun for better video footage. So I took it out there, and the car handled flawlessly. It ran great. They put a little water down right before my first run. So if you watch this run here, you can actually see like the back end of the EVO just kind of kick sideways as I launch it. So that had me a little scared that it was slippery out there. So I didn't accelerate a whole lot or power too much coming through turn 2 because I was a little worried that it might slide a lot again. So that's what made a very fun, actually entertaining race initially, to give this muscle car and a better driver a chance to kind of come in and catch up. But the EVO still got a good amount of power, so it powered through, and we were able to win with that. So it was a lot of fun. Hopefully everyone found it entertaining, and hopefully people aren't too pissed off at me. I don't make the rules, guys. I just bring a car I like out to racing I like to do. So that's at least my theory on it. But yeah, I mean, I get that some people don't like that it's all-wheel drive and that's an advantage. But hey, bring your all-wheel drive cars out there then. I don't know why other people don't bring all-wheel drive cars out there. It's perfect for it. Should it be in its own class? I don't care, I guess. I mean, for me, it would just kind of stink if they made their own class for all-wheel drive, and then it's me and like one other car every week. Like, what's the point? Like, that's no fun. Like, I mean, not because like I beat up on other people, but it's no fun because you don't get to see like the variety. Like, it's fun having a variety of cars race against each other, and it's cool too to just show people what this EVO can do. Because again, this year I know there were people that didn't think it would win because they just, probably hadn't attended in the past or didn't know it was all-wheel drive or whatever, but I think it's cool to see a variety of cars race each other. Front-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive versus all-wheel drive. A lot of horsepower versus a little horsepower. And yeah, and I get where people people get bored of seeing the same car or same person win over and over again. I get that too. So, but it's all in good fun. I'm just out there having fun, that's for sure. So hopefully we'll be able to do it again next year. And but for now, Spectator Racing is done for the season. So actually, what's coming up next, hopefully, will be ice racing, and that's the next plan for this EVO. Either way, I think it's very cool to have this car back out and doing some racing. And of course, if you've been following along since the whole beginning of this, thank you. Hopefully you understand, like, it's cool to see a car like this actually still get out there and as rusty and as much crap as it needed when I first got it, you know, and it's still rusty, and hopefully we'll continue the journey to fix some of that rust. But that's my rant that I just wanted to, spiel out to you guys. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching this episode of the Ugly Evo Build blog. And as always, if I screwed something up, please let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Look for any serious updates that would have needed to be done. They will be in the video description on YouTube if there are some updates that needed to be made. But as always, this is Paul from Boosted Film saying thanks so much for watching.